In the mid-'80s, when I was serving Summit Church, we had students that came to the church, and we were very fortunate to have a fraternity president come to church every Sunday, and he brought a lot of the fraternity with him, which was good. One weekday, he came into my office and told me that he was an alcoholic and was going to AA meetings and was starting through the 12 steps, and asked if I would be the person who would listen to his confession as one of the steps. And I said I would do that. And he said, well, have you ever been to an AA meeting? I said, no. And he said, well, I would encourage you to go to a couple AA meetings to know what it's about, so when I talk to you about my failings, you'll know the context. So I did that. I went to an AA meeting at First Community Church out in Marble Cliff. And I sat there, and I looked around the room, and I thought, oh, man, I know that person. That's a minister. And I know her. She's on TV. And I started looking around the room thinking, wow, he's an alcoholic. She's an alcoholic. And I thought, oh, I didn't know there were that many alcoholics. And then I thought, oh, I wonder if anybody's looking at me saying, oh, I didn't know Keeny was an alcoholic. And I thought, whoa, my gut reaction was I wanted to stand up and say, no, I'm not one. I'm just here to help this person. I'm here to hear their confession. I want to support them, but I'm not an alcoholic. I wanted to differentiate myself. I didn't want to be misidentified. And ever since that episode, I've thought of where we misidentify people and confuse people's identities. Sometimes we might say, is that person black or white? It's like we have to know. Is that person black or white? Is that person gay or straight? We have to know. Is that person an immigrant or not? Is that person a Republican or a Democrat? Is that person male or female? It's important that we know the identity because we don't want to misidentify anybody. It seems to make a difference in how we relate to that person. I think that's part of what's going on in this baptism of Jesus, where it says John would have prevented him. John's baptism was for converts to Judaism, and it was also to wash away sin. So people that John were baptizing were admitting they were sinners, and they wanted to have a fresh relationship with God. And so when Jesus comes to be baptized, John says, wait a minute. If you're baptized, if you go in that water, people are going to think you're a sinner. And do we want people to think that you're a sinner? We don't want a case of people misidentifying you. I know you're not a sinner. I remember once at a church I was serving, we had an altar call, and somebody, a prominent person in the church and the community, came up for the altar call, and just caused this wave of conversation. Wonder what their sin is. I wonder what they did, So John tries to prevent this baptism because he doesn't want Jesus in the water with all those other sinners, and all that sin floating around in the water. And Jesus says, no, let's do it. It's to fulfill all righteousness. So Jesus gets in the water with all the other sinners to fulfill righteousness. Now, righteousness is not only doing the right thing, it's how one does the right thing. One can do the right thing, but it can be an arrogance and removed from any relationship. It can be condescending. I think of, Susan wants a present for Christmas, and I think, I got you a present. What do you want? Well, I did the right thing. It was just how I did it that isn't right. And Jesus says, I'm going to be helping people and forgiving people and reconciling people, but it's important how I do it. I'm going to be in the water with the people I'm working with the people I'm saving, with the people I'm forgiving. I'm in it with them. I'm not above them. I'm not arrogant. I'm not condescending. This is where, the Isaiah passage comes in. This is my servant who will not quench a dimly burning wick, who will be gentle, who will not lift up his voice. Jesus is among the people as he goes about saving them. He's one of the people. And the voice comes from heaven and says, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." Well, in Jesus fulfilling the righteousness, he is living out Isaiah 42. He is showing that he is with the people, and that is pleasing to God. The first part of this quotation is, "This is my Son," is from Psalm 2. It's a coronation. It's a coronation for the king. The king is special. The king is God's chosen ruler. And so the voice from heaven is saying two things about Jesus. This is my Son. Jesus is the Lord. He is special. He is singled out by God for this special work. And yet how he goes about this is as a servant. He is among the people. He is with them. That's very common. He's special and common as he's with the people. He can be mistaken for an ordinary person. There's a sense of oneness in Jesus' baptism. He is one with God. This is my Son. He's special. But he's one with the people. I'm in the water. I'm swimming in the water with you. So there's this oneness of Jesus with God and the people. Our baptism. God says that to us. This is my beloved child, with whom I am well pleased. In our baptism, God says we're special. You are my child. You're special. With whom I am well pleased. You're in the water with everyone else. Whether we came in our parents' arms for baptism or whether we came for as adults, we got in the water with everyone else. And so we have this commonality and common ground with everyone else. There's a sense of oneness in baptism. We are one with God and one with everyone else. So, on this Baptism of the Lord Sunday, as we do every year, we remember our baptism. Now, I don't remember my baptism. It's always struck me as odd that we do this, remember your baptism. I don't remember my baptism. I suppose most of you here don't remember your baptism. You were baptized as infants. You don't remember it. I'm somewhat glad anymore that I don't remember my baptism. Because I realize that God made this promise to love me as God's child, regardless of whether I was good looking or smart or clever or charming or rotten. God made this promise to love me because that's who God is. The baptism isn't really about how wonderful I am. It's about how wonderful God is in promising to love me as God's child. And I'm afraid if I remembered my actual baptism, I would somehow think it was because of how wonderful I was and how charming I am. God made this promise to love me regardless. And God made this promise, and it doesn't have to be promised again. God doesn't go back on God's promises. And I count on that. And that's why in our denomination, we don't baptize a second time. It's because God made the promise, and we trust that promise. We don't doubt that promise. So we don't remember our baptism. We remember that we are baptized. We remember that God made the promise. We remember that we were in the water with everyone else. But I forget that all the time. I forget that I'm baptized. I forget that I'm special, that God says, "You are my beloved son." I forget that, and I start to feel I'm insignificant, and I don't count, and I don't matter, and people ignore me, and people blow me off, that my opinion doesn't matter. I don't feel special a lot of the times. And there are other times I forget that I'm in the water with everyone else. I forget that we're all common, black and white and gay and straight, and male and female, and immigrant and non-immigrant. I forget that we're all in the water, and I tend to think that I am different, that I'm not one of them, that I'm separate, and their concerns don't matter to me. I forget that I'm baptized. It's important, I think, every day to remind ourselves that we're baptized. Martin Luther used to remind himself every day when he felt insignificant or he felt disconnected, "Martin, you are baptized." Every day, it's a good idea to remind ourselves that we are baptized, that we are special, and we are in the water with others. It's a new start that God offers us every day, because God's love comes to us every day. God promised that. When I entered Dartmouth College in the fall of 1969, wow, I matriculated. And we matriculated right there in the library, right in front of the president of the college. I wasn't sure what matriculation was. I thought it was an obscenity. They had this ritual at Dartmouth where before you entered the college as a student, you went up to this fancy room in the library. You put on your suit and tie, your best clothes, and had a 5-minute conversation with the president of the college. And you shook his hand, and he signed with a fountain pen a document that said you were now a member of the Dartmouth community. So I went up, and I shook the president's hand, and we sat there, and John Sloan Dickey, he was a friend of Eisenhower's, and he talked to me. "Oh, you're from Dayton." "Yes, I'm from Dayton." "Well, do you know so-and-so?" A deep, deep pocket giver to Dartmouth. "No, I don't." And he said, "Oh, have you ever played golf at the Dayton Country Club?" "No, haven't done that. Don't play golf." And we limped through this conversation. It was awkward for him to talk to this 18-year-old from Dayton, and it was awkward for me to talk to this older man who was a friend of Eisenhower's. And we limped through this conversation. I picked up my document and left, and I was duly a member of the Dartmouth family because John Sloan Dickey had signed that document. I didn't think much about it at the time, but now that I get alumni magazines, in my class notes, it will list somebody, and it will say, so-and-so only attended Dartmouth for 2 years before transferring. but they still list that person in the class notes as a Dartmouth 73. Sometimes they'll say, so-and-so dropped out in the middle of his first quarter, but they still list him as a Dartmouth 73 and a member of the family. And I realize it doesn't matter whether you completed your 4 years, whether you graduated or not, whether you graduated with honors or not. It doesn't matter. Once you shook hands with John Sloan Dickey and he signed that document, you were a member of the family. And I think that's kind of what like baptism is. It's our matriculation. We are a member of the family. We are always going to be God's beloved child, whether we graduate or not, whether we're wonderful or not. We are still God's beloved child. But here's the difference between God and John Sloan Dickey. I didn't swim in the same waters that John Sloan Dickey did. He didn't swim in my waters. But Jesus swims in my waters. And because Jesus swims in my waters, I know that God swims in my waters. And that makes all the difference. That Jesus and God are in there with me when I'm not feeling wonderful, when I'm feeling ashamed, when I'm feeling guilty, when I'm feeling embarrassed, when I'm feeling lost. I'm God's special child, and I'm in the water with them, with God and the Holy Spirit and Jesus. So our baptism is important to remember that we are baptized. We are special, and Jesus is in the water with us. May it be so. Amen.